Welcome back to the Spirit, Mind and Soul podcast. Today I'm speaking with David Millar, who is a men's coach in Scotland and also runs the Mantra Menswork Retreats. David speaks to me about suffering from low self-worth and then his growth journey after becoming a father. It was great to hear David's journey, and just from a male perspective as well. I really hope that you enjoy this. It's definitely worth a listen. I would appreciate if you're watching, you can hit that like button and then subscribe, and you will be notified when the next episode comes out. Hi David. So happy to have a male guest on the podcast and to hear coaching and struggles in life from a male perspective as well. And I'm really looking forward to delving into the work that you do, talking about men's struggles and what you call emotional isolation that men struggle with as well. Before we delve into all of that and talk about the amazing work that you're doing to help men, can you tell me a bit about your own journey and how you got into this work, and what was the catalyst for you?
Wow, yes. Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on. I think essentially my story begins primarily when I first became a dad. That's kind of when my struggles began, counterintuitively to what normally happens when you have your first child. It's supposed to be a beautiful experience, but it wasn't for me. I was not in a good place, and things had been going on in my life and my relationship that essentially, put me in a state where I felt like I wasn't deserving of love, or I had elements of, betrayal in my life when I was younger that kind of led me to feel like I wasn't good enough. And that's when it kind of started for me. So just leading up to the birth of my first child, I was already in this kind of like negative headspace where I was, self-deprecating all the time. I was maybe feeling a little bit, or a lot of low moods, low self-worth. And then when I became a dad, it like really compounded that for me. So having that responsibility, that loss of autonomy, that change in circumstance, change of life, and ultimately being called into a form of leadership that, when you become a parent, like, it's essential. You have to lead in a certain way, and you have to let parts of yourself die. So like the younger parts of yourself die, maybe the more childish, maybe the boy parts of me had to die. And all of these things kind of compounded on top of how I was already feeling mentally. So I was already feeling low, already feeling in a depressed state, already feeling like I wasn't worthy or I wasn't good enough to receive love. So when I became a dad, it just shot me straight down into a really dark place and kind of spiraled me out of control. And ultimately, it came from a place where I felt like I was going to be alone. I had a lot of situations in my life where people had betrayed or left me, or I felt like I was going to be left. So I was really quite scared. So I was scared, really. It came from a place of fear. And I didn't have the network, though I was looking for it everywhere. I didn't have the network around me to really reach out, to kind of go back to the beginning of where I grew up. I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland, so it's not a particular place where men are open with their feelings, or there's not a real level of vulnerability, or vulnerability is not seen as a strength. And then I moved from the Highlands into a sporting profession. So I was a full-time athlete for most of my life, and that in itself as well is not a space where men are open with their feelings or vulnerable. Like, it's a very hyper competitive environment, it's a very hyper masculine environment, and being honest with your feelings and how you feel about things is not often welcome there. So I kind of felt like throughout my whole life, like, this element of me was not really welcome. This version of me, this part of me that was always connected to my feelings, always wanting to kind of go a bit deeper, ask the questions, go below the surface, maybe challenge some things that I see weren't authentic or honest, or sometimes immature, like challenging those, and that not really being met very well. So that part of me that wanted to connect to emotions was always kind of rejected. So I spent most of my life feeling like this part of me was wrong, like I wasn't welcome in a way. And then fast forward to now, like that's what a lot of men are looking for. They're looking for this authentic connection, looking for um, this deeper honesty or deeper sharing of truth in a space where they can really connect with themselves and other men in an honest way.
Mm-hmm.
But it took me to, like, I'm 38 now, and I started this business a little over a year ago. It took me until then to realize, oh wow, this part of me is actually really welcome, and a lot of people do want that. Like, I am worthy. Oh, this is great, and I'm not looking for recognition, but it was just that point in my life where I was like, oh, I wasn't wrong. Like, that part of me wasn't wrong. And
And
go on.
yeah, I was going to say, you talk about the feelings of, your self-worth and how low that
Mm-hmm.
was. Did you notice that during your teenage years and early adulthood? Were you aware that your self-worth was low?
Yeah, particularly around romance. Like, I just felt like I was, always like looking to connect with people, but I grew up and I was very outgoing when I was younger. But I was around people who were like hyper outgoing, like super extrovert, and it just kind of like outplayed or overshadowed a lot of
Yeah.
what was going on, what I was trying to achieve. And that on top of, like, in my athletic career, I was a professional judo player. I was a GB athlete, but I had an older brother who was better than me, and like throughout my entire life, I was always just known as his brother. So there was always this element of, like, I don't have like sovereignty. I don't have my own voice, or like nobody really respects what I have to say. Nobody really respects who I am. Um, and that was just this story, this narrative that just kept replaying over and over and over again in my life. Like, when I was younger, trying to, find a partner, or trying to connect with, friends or other men or other women, and, kind of falling short. And that then leading into, oh God, when I go into this profession of sport, like, I'm not actually respected because everyone just sees me as this younger sibling of the more successful brother. So that just kind of compounded again this thing where I was like chasing, to be seen, to be heard, to be witnessed and respected in a certain way. So it perpetuated for such a long time that it just drove me deeper into this kind of low self-worth, and always trying to find my voice or find what I'm supposed to do and find my purpose, I suppose, in the end.
So obviously when you've had your first child, then it's all come to the
Mm-hmm.
surface. So how long did that go on before you thought, I need to do something about this?
Oh, pretty quickly. I mean, as soon as I had, my daughter's now 6 years old, and we have a wonderful relationship. We're very close. But in the beginning, I say that I'm a recovering shit dad. So, like, I was not good in the beginning, and I can own that. I can honestly say that, I wasn't present. I was angry. I was lost. I was struggling, and, feeling, ultimately it led me into, suicidal ideation, where I felt like actually it's probably better that I'm not here, because I'm not going to burden these people around me anymore. It would just be better if I was gone. Um, and I realized that wasn't a good place to be in. I mean, that's fairly obvious to say, but when you're in that space, you almost can't see a way out of it. But then, paradoxically, when you're out of that space, you can't ever imagine yourself going back in. So when I was in that space, I reached out. I thought, right, I had planned, really sadly thinking back to that time, like, I had planned how I was going to take my own life, and I was ready to do it. I planned when I was going to do it, how I was going to do it. Um, but something in me just kind of clicked and made me reach out to a good friend of mine, actually, Stuart Sandyman, who runs BreathPod, a breathwork company. And he was doing one-to-one sessions, and I was like, oh, I've never done that before. Like, maybe because I was trying counseling and therapy, and there were no men's groups. That's what I was looking for. There was no specific men's groups around at that time. And I reached out to him and thought, oh, do you know what? I'll go and try breathwork. What's the worst that could happen? And what that did was it took me out of my head and into my body. Um, and you'll know, like, it just reprogrammed so many things. It just cracked me wide open. I was like, oh my God, this was stuff in my body. It wasn't actually in my head. It was stuff that was stored in my body, and I can let it go through this somatic practice. That, there were tears, there were laughter, there was shaking, there was screaming, there was crying. All of this stuff came out in this session, and I'll always be grateful for that. It was only 1 hour, and I was like, oh my God, this has changed. I remember walking around Edinburgh afterwards, just in a daze, like, what
Mm-hmm.
what just happened? Oh my God, maybe I can, like, stay and find a way out of this feeling that I'm in. And that led me down a different path, where I traveled and tried plant medicines. I went deeper into meditation, transcendental meditation, found my own practices that worked best for me, following on from that. And all of this healing over the course of, I'd say, probably 2 years. It took until my daughter was about two and a half, for me to really land in this newly kind of embodied, like, mature masculine father archetype, where I realized, there was, elements of myself that I had to let go, stories that I had to let go of, belief systems that I had to rewrite, parts of myself that I had to wrestle with and do deep shadow work to come through and find myself in a place where I can forgive, first of all, let go, and start to manifest and bring in the stuff that I actually wanted in my life. So it was quite a journey over that 2 year period, and it was consistent. I had to work really, really hard, because there were times where I wanted to just dip back into this shame and pity cycle that I found myself in. And what I see so many men struggling with the same thing, this need for recognition or pity, it's like a silent assassin. It just brings us deeper into this low self-worth, because it's a false support system. When you seek pity on something, it doesn't last long. It's just like it's like a flash in the pan. You get what you want, that dopamine. Oh, like, I feel seen, I feel heard, but you don't. You actually just got validated on this thing that you haven't actually gone, or I didn't actually go into. I didn't ask the questions. Is this true? Am I responsible for any of this? What can change? Have I spoken to the people that I'm complaining about, or seeking pity for what they've done to me? Have I actually spoken to them about it? Because maybe their story is totally different to mine, and it would actually reframe. So much of this is around communication and loss of connection with people. And when we go inwards like that, when we become like hypo aroused, like we go inwards, and we start to shrink and go inside and focus only on our own story, then we lose all these other aspects of our lives that and parts of the story that we're telling ourselves. So when I actually started going out and asking people, oh, what was your take on that? They're like, oh, I didn't think that at all. I'm so sorry. I'm like, oh, bloody hell. Like, but so much of us don't do that. So many men don't do that, because it's seen as this vulnerability. That would be vulnerable to go and say that, like, hey, I feel this way. What was your side of that story? And then they tell their side of the story, and you realize, oh, I had it totally wrong. I'm wrong, and I can rewrite that story now. But it took me to do that, to go deep into my own shadows and figure out what was actually true for me to get to the place I am now.
It's hard to go inwards, because they call it doing the work, but it's hard. And like you say, you go back to the shame and the guilt, because it's like, well, it's familiar. But also, when you do the work, there's a lot that you need to face, especially doing plant medicine. Like you say, that brings a lot of stuff that was hidden in the subconscious mind. It brings it all to the surface that you need to face. And I wanted to ask, before you went down that route, did you try any conventional methods to help yourself before you started going down the more alternative
Well,
routes?
so I tried counseling and therapy, and
Did that help?
not really, not for me, no, because what the problem, and therapy is great. I think therapy can help a lot of people, and counseling is really powerful for so many people. But what it did for me was it just compounded the issue, because what I needed was connection. Like, I needed true connection, and to open up and explore and express my feelings in order to try and understand them a little bit better. But what that did for me was it created more taboo and more stigma, because I felt that it was just me and one other person, and I couldn't talk to anybody else about what went on in that room. It just made it more of a kind of secret thing that I was again not trying to hide, but I didn't feel open or comfortable talking about, because it just had this, it's a bit different now. This is 6 years ago, where the therapeutic space in Scotland was still pretty, almost underground, but particularly for men. But now it's more accepted, only just a few years later, which is really encouraging. But at that point, it just was still behind closed doors. Like, it wasn't something that I could really share with people or open up about and tell other people of my struggles, because it felt like, one, I was shunning responsibility. Two, I was dumping emotional load on those people, which, to go on a little bit of a tangent, tends to happen in partnerships. A lot of what I see in men is, they're not taking ownership and accountability over the thing that's happening or the issue they're facing. what they do is they abdicate responsibility to their partner, where they dump the emotional load on her, like, this is wrong, like, oh, I need to fix this, or something, I feel this way. And they're almost seeking like a mothering relationship for their partner to then turn around and fix it for them, which never goes well. And that's what was happening to me as well. I did that same thing. So I, like, all of this stuff that I've done has helped me be the coach I am now, because I made all the mistakes. I did all the wrong things. I was an arsehole. I, behaved irrationally. I was moody. I was aggressive. I was a little boy seeking for validation and recognition. And I was dumping my emotional load on my partner and asking her to fix me. But in actual fact, what I need to do is fix myself. But what's really important is we find other peers. For men, it's men. So other men to really hold that space for us. And, it kind of all culminated in this connection to a brotherhood. So brotherhood, like men's work, that was the cherry on the top of the cake for me. So going through counseling and therapy, not really getting anywhere. Then breathwork cracked me wide open. That took me down a self-exploration through plant medicine and deeper meditations and deeper practices. And then I found men's work, and I was like, oh, this is it. This is the thing that actually helps, where we can just let go of all the bullshit and all the bravado, all the machismo, and just get into this and find out like what the truth is. Because so often when you're in these men's work spaces and you ask, when men say stuff, they tell their story, you're like, is that true? And they're kind of stumped. They're like, yeah, parts of it. Okay, which parts? And they have to own up to like where they've filled in the gaps of their own story. And it's not to call people out, it's to call them forwards. It's to say, right, okay, you've told this story. How much of it is actually true? And where's the culpability? Where have you been responsible in in creating the situation you're in now? And then we offer a space for deeper reflection and a chance for men to let go. And this is all the stuff I've done, just letting go of all that history or the narrative that I've created in my own mind.
So obviously you did the work on yourself for years, and it was a year ago you said that you started to getting into this work. So how did that come about? How did you end up doing the retreats that you're doing and the coaching that you're doing now?
That in itself was another journey. My dad got cancer. He's now cancer free, which is phenomenal. But when he got cancer, it didn't look great. And it just kind of put a perspective shift on my entire life, because, like I said, like I've always been this way. I've always been connected to this kind of work and this form of communication and, this authenticity, though I went searching for it. Like it's always been there innately in me. I felt it was rejected when I was younger, but now it's been accepted. But when my dad got cancer, I found myself in a situation where, time was of the essence. Like there was an urgency of time. And I didn't really know my dad. So my mom and dad are together. I had a lovely childhood. They provided a lot for me, but my dad wasn't present. And we've spoken about this loads, since. And I now know more about him in the last year than I've known in my entire life, because I felt, right, I'm working full time, not seeing my kids. I have 3 children now, 6, 3, and 1. I'm not seeing my kids. Repeating the cycle of my dad being away all the time. So I'm just doing the same thing again. Like he provided for us, but he was rarely with us. So I didn't really get to know him. And that's what my kids were experiencing too. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like if my dad passes and we don't know each other, like what was this all for? And worst of all, like if I repeat the cycle and do the same thing to my kids, like what is the point? So I just decided, right, this is it. I'm going to fulfill my purpose, like my dharma, my life's passion, and that is like creating spaces for men, like working with men. And it was kind of fueled from like when I was going through my healing journey in the beginning. More men in my kind of community started gravitating towards me and asking questions, because there was other dads that were having struggles, but kind of kept it low key and did what men do and just keep it inside and don't talk about it. But as I started to get into a really good space, they saw me going from fully checking out to like fully checking in. And they were curious. Oh, like what have you been doing? Like I feel like I really need to talk to you. So I had, ended up walking around the local park like almost every night of the week, speaking to different men. And when I was doing that, these men were opening up, and I was giving them space to, like, no question, I'm not trying to fix them. And that's one thing about men's work, is we don't fix, we don't give advice, we don't do what men do and try and be in our masculine goal, like fixing, I'm going to give you the advice. We just witness and let men talk until they have nothing else to say. And often we find our own answers when we do that. So I was doing that walking around the park, giving men space to cry, to laugh, to scream, to share openly, authentically, to, let go of what they've been holding without any shame or judgment or criticism or advice. And I would go home, I'm literally walking around with a pram, with my daughter in the pram, like listening to these men and asking them, some questions and guiding them to find their own answers, which is essentially coaching. Back then, I didn't know that's what it was. I just intuitively knew that's what I had to do for these men. And it was the most fulfilled I've ever been. Like, I got home after those walks and was like to my wife, oh my God, like, I just helped that man, and he's going home like a better version of himself. He's going to be able to show up more for his child, more for his wife, more for his colleagues. He's potentially going to leave his job and find more happiness. Like, all of these things were happening. I was like, this is it. But then went through, what I need to do, or what I thought I needed to do, like, was to go to work and provide and do these different things, not really thinking through, like, what do I want to do in this world? What is my passion? What can I do in this world that's going to make a difference? And when my dad got cancer and I decided to leave my job, that was it. I just thought, that was the best thing I've done. I'm going to do more of that. And that allowed me to channel through all of this part of myself that I was speaking about earlier, where it was so rejected from younger years, but now this space that I can hold with men, where I'm asking them to open up and be authentic and asking them the right questions to lead them to their right answers. It's so deeply fulfilling now. And so many men are, going through major transformations through the retreats that I run and the coaching that I do, that it's just creating such a big impact in the world for men to move into this more mature masculine, or move into more wholeness in their life. So being able to show up better as a father, as a lover, as a man, as a working man, whatever it is they're trying to achieve. Like, I'm really fulfilled by providing this space for men. But it was all linked to my dad, and the lack of connection I had with him. And when he developed cancer, I was like, oh, something's got to change.
I think I had a realization recently, because I do similar work, and like that feeling of fulfillment that you talk about and how good it makes you feel. But I think part of that, and the realization I had, is because obviously you do the work on yourself first, and you get yourself to a place so you know the tips and the tools, and you've got, you're in a good space to be able to hold that space for other people. And then the realization that I had was thinking, why did I get into this work? Why am I helping people? But it's, why wouldn't you want to live among people that are feeling what you're feeling? The gratitude, the love, being in that great headspace. And there's a society in general, we're not doing pretty good these days, where I think we're on the way up now, but we really, especially with lockdown and everything the past few years that we've been through as a society and a collective, I don't know if you agree, but it's, part of when I sat and thought, why am I doing this work? Well, why wouldn't I want to live among people who are at that place where they're full of gratitude and love and mentally in a good place? Does
Yeah,
that
for
make
sure.
sense?
I feel like society is at a tipping point now. We're at the critical mass where, for such a long time, and I bring it back to men because that's who I work with, but particularly for men, there's been so many, or such a large percentage of men who are, unconscious, or just like going through the motions, like going to work 9 to 5, coming home, not having connection with their wives, maybe shouting at their kids, maybe being addicted to alcohol, drugs, porn, sex, junk food, all these things to try and fulfill themselves. But now we're starting to see a lot of people moving into this sense of fulfillment. And I really understand what you're saying there in terms of like the village, because like I want to surround myself with like-minded people. Like I'm ambitious, I'm dedicated, I'm devoted, I'm passionate, I'm creative, I'm all these things, and I surround myself with people like that. So part of my mission as well is to provide the world with better men, lovers, and fathers. That's what Mantra Menswork is for: men, lovers, and fathers. So I want to help men be better men, be better lovers, be more conscious and connected with their partners, and be better fathers. I see the father as like the pinnacle of kind of the masculine, or the mature masculine. And that's not to say you can't be a man without reaching being a father. Like a father is like an archetypal thing. It doesn't have to be biological. It can be, someone who's a pillar in the community, who is responsible, who is disciplined, who can create order and purpose and really help other people and raise them up around them. Like that's what a father is to me. So you don't have to be a biological father, but I see that as like the peak. If you can do manhood, if you can be a man and let the boy parts of you die, and then you can be a conscious partner and connected in a real loving relationship where there's an equilibrium and authenticity, and then you can step up and be a father as well. Like that's the challenge. Like you can do those things. Like I've got 3 kids. I'm a full-time dad for a 6, 3 and a 1-year-old, and still managing to operate a business and be present and loving with my partner. That's a challenge. That takes real work. So if I didn't have kids, like the other 2 would be super easy right now for me. I'd be like, yeah, that'd be so easy. But to step up and do those 2 things and be a father, like that's the real challenge. So you can be mature, but doing that as well as being a father is really challenging. So yeah, I see this creation of this village now, this tribe where more men and women are really waking up and trying to do their work on themselves and trying to, move away from that kind of unconscious life where they're just going through the motions and trying to find more fulfillment and passion and purpose in their life. And when that starts to happen, the vibration starts to raise, and we start to see this shift in the collective consciousness where, people gravitate more towards each other. The amount of people that I've found in this last year that are similar to me, have the same levels of ambition and passion and dedication to this work, it's so amazing. They just like come out of nowhere. They just manifested out of nothing. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even know you existed. But now we're together in this in this life. And I always have this analogy of like the canopy of a forest. So like the top of the canopy, you can't see through it, but like now that I feel like I've popped my head above the canopy, and I just see so many heads like popping above, and I'm like, oh cool, there's another person, and I'm seeing so many of these heads popping up now. That's the analogy that comes up in my head. I just love that feeling of more people stepping into wholeness and finding out who they truly are.
Yeah, and allowing themselves to be vulnerable. I feel like this is a new thing, and that's a big thing for me as well. And I think for probably most of us, we have that barrier goes up throughout life. Where it's just being vulnerable. I think the past couple of years has really helped, and like you say, with all the new retreats, and there's lots going on in the spiritual world and the alternative healing world, and I think that's kind of opens our eyes and allowing us to be vulnerable. It's a safe space for us to be vulnerable, but there was that barrier for me, because that barrier was up for most of my life. It's really hard. You can't just let that down. It's really hard to break that down, but I think we're starting to now. And I wanted to ask you, what have you noticed a change in the past year from when you started to where you are now with your work and the men that you work with? Have you noticed that there's been a change?
Definitely. I think it's becoming more accepted to be vulnerable, and I think it's because there's a more open, accepting societal shift for people to be honest. I think it's around truth. I think a lot of people haven't been true to themselves, and in doing that haven't been honest with others. And the major shift, particularly for men, is around awareness. And I feel like it follows like an awareness, choice, and trust model. So when we become aware of the things we need to do in ourselves, like that's the first step. Taking ownership and accountability and responsibility over your own healing or your own growth. It's not always healing as well. That's the thing. It's not always about people who are healing something. It's about growth as well. Like some people are kind of on the way, but they just need to change and shift and grow certain elements of themselves to be who they're supposed to be. But this awareness is the first point. Getting the awareness, then finding the accountability, then making the choice to change it, because everything is a choice. We choose how we feel, we choose what we believe, we choose how we show up in the world, we choose how we respond in every situation. Once we make that choice, we then have to trust what happens after that. Like popping our head above the canopy. We don't know what's above there, but we have to trust that we're going up there, and we've got to pop our head above and see what happens. And then when we're bathed in sunshine and a fresh breeze, then we realize, okay, I can trust that. And there are loads of choices that we have to make, that we have to trust. But I find a lot of men really stepping into, and women, really stepping into understanding what their core values are. So what they really, truly, honestly want to live their life to, because we've been sold like a lot of lies over the last 100 years, and like society's been formed and shifted and shaped in certain ways that has led us into this kind of, I don't want to use this term in the way that it's normally used, the capitalist society, where we're just feeding into a system where we're just worker bees essentially. But so many people are starting to realize, oh, what are my values? Like, how do I want to live? How do I want to show up? Who do I want to be? Who do I want to be with? And when we start to cultivate a really strong value system, then we can start to live in a more authentic way. And particularly for men, like I feel the four main cornerstones of that value system is getting into equilibrium or finding a healthy relationship in vitality, integrity, self-leadership, and emotional connection. For men, those are the four main elements of what it is to be an embodied, mature, masculine man: vitality, integrity, self-leadership, and emotional connection. And once we start to get those sorted, once we start to grow in those areas, then everything else will flow in our lives. But so many of those are out of whack with a lot of men that I work with.
Yeah, and this is what I mean by the barrier that goes up, because when we have expressed maybe in teenage years, early adulthood, our true values, and it gets shot down and then we suppress it. So then in order to get back into that and tap into our values and what we really want in life and not what's expected of us from society, but that barrier is already up and it's really hard to get that, you know, to break back in and tap into. So this is what I mean by we've got this back, and, you know, being vulnerable, because then we protect ourselves when we've shown ourselves to be vulnerable in the past and it's been shot down and it's been attacked or laughed at or mocked.
Well, it's also our society, you know, teaches, our education system teaches obedience and conformity. So when you're different from anyone else, because like the way our education system is set up, you have to find the same answers by the same route as everybody else in the class, and then you're judged on your performance consistently. So we grow up just like conforming to the same answers, the same model consistently all the time. And then when we are different or unique, we're mocked for it or we're punished for it in some cases. So of course, like when we go through primary school and high school in the UK, like we just want to be the same as everyone else, because that's what we're taught to do. We have to sit in a chair, listen to the teacher, do the same sum and get the same answer. And if you don't, then you're going to be brought up in front of the class and shamed for it. So when we start to grow up, we realize, oh my God, like I didn't want to do those sums. I don't even like maths. I like dance. I like dancing. I want to dance and like sing. So, I mean, this is, you know, one of the things that I'm going through now with my daughter. We took our daughter out of school because we wanted to home educate for these same reasons, because we want her to be unique and express herself fully. And we can teach her. Like, I'm fairly clever. My wife's very intelligent. We can teach her the stuff that we want or we think that she needs to know. So, yeah, I feel like this kind of lostness, that is what it is. Yeah, a lot of people feeling lost because we've been molded into the same like carbon copy of each other through childhood, and any uniqueness was kind of drummed out of us.
So what does the future hold then with your obviously men's retreats and your coaching? Because I guess you're very ambitious. So what do you plan on doing in the future around men's work?
Well, with Mantra Menswork particularly, we're looking to expand, take on, you know, a few people to support the mission. Like I said, my mission is to provide the world with better men, lovers, and fathers. And I have so many coaches and people who are coming on board and starting to realize this and wanting to take the step into service, like serving other people, because that's what it is. You know, we use a lot of the masculine archetypes in our work, and the most dominant one, I suppose, is the king. You know, but the king is there to serve the kingdom. He's not served by the kingdom. So it's about service. So when we step into this work, so many men are stepping forward and saying, yeah, I want to help other men. So with the growth that we're looking over the next couple of years is, you know, bringing more people in, maybe running a couple more retreats a year. We run one-day retreats. We run full weekend transformation retreats. And then I do one-to-one coaching with people, but we're going to be doing loads of different things like group programs. I want to go into schools and also work with young men to try and shape or try and undo this kind of obedience and conformity and the shaping of young male minds, because I feel like if we can go back at that point and help teenagers realize the power they have, because that's all it is, like it's sovereign power. Like if they can make their own choices and live by a value system at that age, when they get to 30, they're going to have the critical thinking in place to make the bigger decisions and trust. They're going to have more awareness, be able to make the choice and trust the choice because they trust themselves. Right now, very few young people, teenagers, adolescents, fully trust themselves because they're not supported to do that. So I want to go back and help in high schools and really teach young men what it is to be a mature masculine male and not turn out to be, your typical lad, which has good bits. Humor is fine, but when it kind of goes into the immature masculine, that's where we find so many men now in the immature masculine. And we've got dads walking around. I work with so many dads that are still boys by their own admission. They're still boys. They can't let go of silly things like computer games, porn addiction, lad banter, going to the pub. Like, these are things that are deeply ingrained in our society, and we need to deprogram and let go of childish things if we're going to step up into mature masculinity and especially fatherhood.
Mm-hmm. And where is your Mantra Menswork Retreats? Where are they based?
So at the moment they're based out of Cayenne, which is in Highland Perthshire. Beautiful retreat centre run by Roy Lamont and Shannon, his partner. Wonderful space. We've got one next weekend, actually. Our next one's next weekend, and we're going to be doing our one-day retreats up there as well. So we've got loads of one-day retreats. We also do one-day retreats in Edinburgh, Glasgow. We're going to do one in Aberdeen in the second half of this year. So yeah, I would encourage everybody on here to check out Kaim as well. It's spelled CAIM. I think their handle is Welcome to Kaim. It's a really beautiful space. And yeah, it's going to be a really powerful retreat that we're running next weekend. We've got 24 men coming along. It's a sold out retreat. And I'm excited to serve the men who come along.
Yeah, it's amazing. What about for you, David? Is there something, obviously you're doing all this work now for men and for other people. Is there anything that you're longing for yourself and for your future that's just personal for you?
That's a really good question. Nobody's ever asked me that. Yeah, no, I like that because it's, I get so much from this work. So many people often say to me, are you not exhausted after that? You're not exhausted after that retreat? And the answer is no. Like it really fills me up because it's what I needed when I was younger. It's what I was searching for and wasn't there for me when I nearly took my own life. So for me to step up in that sacrificial service, that's what I see it as. It's a sacrificial service, and that's what fatherhood is as well. Like that sustains me, that fulfills me. But I suppose what I'm longing for is a continuation or growth of the tribe. More financial freedom, more sovereignty. We grow our own food we've got some land and we grow our own food. So a more abundant food source. I really need to double down and work on that and start to learn more about permaculture. And yeah, just, my end of life vision is what I write. And I actually invite a lot of men to do this. I talk about the end of life vision. Like, what do you want to happen at the end of your life? What do you want it to look like? And for me, I've done this vision so many times. It's sitting in a chair that I've made myself in the garden I live, because this is my forever home, and my wife sitting next to me in a chair that I've made as well, and our adult children want to come and hang out with me by their own choice. They want to be near me. They want to ask me questions. They want to get my advice. They want to connect with me as adults. So I want a life where I'm a fulfilled old man, still able to move around and grow my own food and do exercise, with a loving relationship, deeply connected with my wife who's sitting right next to me, and our kids and their kids want to come and be with us. Like that's my life. And if I put that vision, because it sounds quite cliche, that sounds like, oh, that's lovely. Doesn't that sound nice? But then when you start to work back, okay, so what do I have to do now to get me to that point? Because if my kids are going to hang out or want to hang out with me when I'm older, I need to develop trust and connection with them now that sustains forever. Like, this is forever. That's the funny thing, is like a lot of men buy into this stuff. Like, yeah, that sounds great. It's like, okay, the work starts now and it's until you die. And like, oh yeah, oh Jesus, right, okay, that's quite a commitment. Like, yeah, so how are you going to show up for your kids now so they trust you, they depend on you, they seek your guidance? How can you be someone who's reliable, who's trustworthy, who's wise? Then you apply the same thing to your relationship. If you want that loving relationship, how can you be someone who's reliable, trustworthy, who's a leader in the family, not the leader, but a leader, who doesn't abdicate leadership and want your partner to look after you? How can you be someone that she can lean on at times when she needs to? How can you be someone who's compassionate, loving, understanding, present for both children and your partner? And then how can you develop all the financial freedom that gets you to that place? Then that talks about business. It talks about what can you do with your finances now? What can you do with your portfolio? What can you do with your responsibilities? Then it goes back to your value system. So it all starts now. So that's my end of life vision, but it's not just a nice picture. It's all the steps that go between now and then that make it happen.
So I think that's a great place to end, David. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. Even I've learned from you today as well. And yeah, if you let us know how people can get in touch with you, either coaching or retreats, or just to go on and have a look and check out the work that you're doing.
Of course.
What's the best way to contact you?
I'm mainly on Instagram, but even then I'm trying to step away from Instagram and do more in-person marketing. But you can get in touch with me on Instagram. It's Mantra Menswork or David Ross Millar, Millar spelled with an A. Or you can go to mantramenswork.com and get in touch with me there.
Great. Well, thank you so much, David, for taking time to come on the podcast today. Thank you for listening to David's journey on the Spirit, Mind and Soul podcast. All details on how to contact David are in the description below. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode and subscribe. You'll be notified when the next episode comes out.